Hi, I'm Lara and this is tropetrinitytrilogy. Today I'll be giving you my writing tip, writing fight scenes like a video game. So I realize your first thought might be, oh, so I should give my antagonist a giant eyeball that needs to be hit 3 times in order for my protagonist to defeat them. Or you might be thinking, oh, so my protagonist should slash through hordes of enemies like it's nothing. Or you might just be thinking, oh, so I should just write fight scenes that don't actually serve the plot of the story. No, don't do that. I will stab you. What I mean is that when playing a video game, you can't just believe more or use the power of love to defeat your enemies. The boss you're battling isn't going to suddenly become an idiot and slip up, and no one is going to save you. You have to defeat your opponent by utilizing the skills you've learned throughout the game, learning their tactics, and utilizing both your surroundings and weapons in a way that when you finally beat them, it feels really satisfying. And that's the feeling I want to take from a video game when writing a fight scene. I want to make it satisfying. Fight scenes are some of the most commonly skipped scenes in books, and it's not hard to see why. A common issue with most book fight scenes is that authors focus on the flashy action, which yes, is cool in a movie or a video game, but looking cool can't really carry a fight when your fight looks like this. You see? It's just words. Wait, sorry. My bad. This is the fight. Obviously, it looks so much cooler and flashier now that you're on the fight page. Gosh, I was so misleading, I'm sorry. So what carries a fight in a book, at least for me, is my emotional investment in it, how well written it is, and the strategic intelligence of a fight. And it's the third point I want to take from video games in order to create a satisfying fight. So in video games, characters have stats. They have specific skills and weaknesses and moves that they tend to use in a fight. And I do like to give these to my characters in a book, but in an albeit less rigid way. A lot less rigid. It's not a video game. Because it's important to point out that in a book, your characters are a lot less limited than in a game. But also in a video game, the boss or antagonist tends to be the one with the more raw power and more rigid moveset. Whereas the hero or protagonist is the underdog who uses their intelligence to figure out their opponent's strategy and outsmart them in order to win. Which I think creates a much more satisfying fight in a book than a protagonist who is the more powerful. And personally, I do like to know stats for my characters. Again, not as rigid as a video game, but I have a point. So there are 3 general categories of stats I like to focus on in a book: physical ability, intellectual ability, and emotional stability. The first I'd like to focus on is physical ability, which is made up of a bunch of different skills, weapons, and armor. Different physical abilities your character can have are the ability to wield a sword, swim, be physically strong, fast, flexible, shoot a gun or bow, or to use magic. And lacking in any of these abilities is a weakness for your character. It's also important to know what weapons your character has. If your character knows how to wield a sword like a master, but doesn't have a sword, it doesn't really matter. Or if your character's strong, but the fight takes place in water and they can't swim, then they're kind of SOL. And also, if your character is fighting someone and they're about evenly matched, but the other person has tons of armor and they're just wearing a shirt, they have the disadvantage. And don't get me wrong, physical stuff is cool. However, since books aren't a visual medium, I would say the best way to do this is to make your protagonist the underdog and have them use their intelligence in order to win. Or they can manipulate their opponent's emotional weaknesses in order to win. Now again, I don't mean make your character completely physically incompetent, but I would say to physically give them the disadvantage. So let's go to stat number 2, intelligence. Intelligence can be a lot of things. It can be your character's ability to strategize ahead of time, to strategize on the fly, to take in their surroundings and then use their surroundings to their advantage, and to study and learn their opponent's tactics and then use these to their advantage. Your character's intelligence is what turns everything and anything into a weapon. Like this pen. And that's another advantage over a book than a video game, because in a video game this tends to just be a pen that you probably can't even interact with, whereas in a book this can be a weapon if your character is smart enough to use it. And finally, the third stat is the emotional state of your character. the emotional state of your character should be consistent to who they are as a character and definitely should affect how they act in the fight. This is something that the opponent can use to take advantage of to beat the protagonist, or something the protagonist can use to defeat their opponent. Of all the states, emotional state I would say is the one least utilized in video games. Mostly because in a video game, the developer cannot predict the player's emotional state, and also because the point of a video game is to either beat your antagonist by physically beating them through the skills of the game, or by outsmarting them in a sort of puzzle boss type way. However, in a book, I highly recommend you use this for at least some of your fights, because that is one advantage books have over other mediums of art. Books can put you right into the head of the protagonist. Let us experience the feelings of your protagonist. Let us smell the blood, taste the sweat, and feel every punch. Don't think of your fight as an excuse to make your characters do cool backflips or shoot fire from their hands. Think of your fight as an emotional and passionate debate between two characters that utilizes their physical abilities, intelligence, and emotional state. However, when deciding what stats you give your characters, you should not just give them random ones you think will be cool. Your fight shouldn't feel like a separate section from your story. It should be interwoven with everything else in a seamless way. So your character's physical abilities, intelligence, and emotional state in the fight should be determined by how they've acted throughout the rest of your story. So if you need your antagonist to do a specific thing to allow your protagonist to win, don't just have them randomly do it like an idiot. Instead, make it an integral part of their character. If you need your antagonist to slowly taunt your injured protagonist, have it be something they've done before, and have it be something that's always worked for them. Show your antagonist taunting their previous opponents and then easily killing them. Make their actions not something conveniently dumb to save your protagonist. Instead, make it a show of power that your protagonist is smart enough to manipulate in order to defeat their opponent. Another thing to take into account is that in video games, your characters have life bars. Now, a lot of times in video games, your character can lose life and they continue fighting the same way, and this is something you should definitely not do like a video game. But the point is when you play a video game, you are very aware of how close you are to dying. If it's a hard game. If it's an easy game, then you don't care, because you could probably just survive on a quarter of a heart for 20 hours and be perfectly fine. But I digress. The point is, when playing a video game, you are very concerned with how close you are to dying. And this is something your character should be too. So whenever your characters get hit, have it physically affect what they can do. If I get stabbed in the arm, I should not be punching people with this hand like nothing. Unless you're going to use the whole adrenaline thing, but then your character's heart will be beating faster and they'll bleed to death faster. So that's another issue. But the point is that take your character's physical life and injuries into account and treat them as very important. Like in some games, you start limping if you become injured and your vision becomes blurred and there's blood splatter in your vision, which doesn't really fit in real life, so don't put that in your book. But the point is, make your character's life and injuries matter. And the difference is with this in a video game is in a video game you care because you don't want to die, and that's kind of how it works for you since you're controlling them. But in a book, they aren't controlling the person, and there isn't a convenient life bar just being like, you got this many hearts left. And even then, I don't think I'd care in a book. So in order to make this feel more relevant to the reader, have your characters get injured and have it impact what they're capable of doing. Also, just saying that if your character's injured before the fight, take that into account too. Don't just have the injury process start during the fight. And finally, I'd like to talk about the arena in which your fight takes place. Now, to be completely honest, when I'm playing a video game, usually my use of the arena consists of me running in circles until I figure out what the heck I'm doing. But besides that, the arena in which a fight takes place is something every player takes account of. Because in a game when I'm not given the space to run around, I feel trapped. So if the fight takes place in a narrow hallway, I'm gonna get a lot more injured than if it took place in an open area where I can run away and procrastinate having to interact with the person. And when there are objects in the arena, I find every possible way to use them to my advantage. even if it's just diving behind something to dodge. So I recommend before your fight starts to paint a picture of the setting. Give the reader a sense of space and mention any potential tools or weapons before the fight starts. So the point of conveying your character's stats, life, and the setting before the fight starts to your reader is a sort of way to let your reader be involved in the fight. In a video game, a fight is not just cool action. It is a player solving a problem with the tools given. So by giving your reader the information about your characters and setting, you are giving them all the same tools as your protagonist in order to defeat their opponent. So not every fight needs to be like this. Some fights can be more emotionally driven. However, by considering this in more important fights such as the climax, you can make them all the more satisfying. So instead of having your character win from Deus Ex Machina, the power of love, or just being able to punch better, so set up a sort of puzzle for both your protagonist and reader in which they have all the pieces needed to beat the opponent, and they just have to be smart enough to put them together and win. Now, don't make the solution obvious. You should hide the answers throughout the story in a way that when the protagonist finally does defeat their opponent, it's like a tiny plot twist. The point is that books are not visual, so you can't just make them look cool. So instead, to get the satisfaction that other mediums have for fights, make your fights intelligent. So I would like to give examples of intelligent fights. It's the climax of Disney's Aladdin. Physically, Aladdin is outmatched. He wasn't strong enough to take Jafar's staff, and Jafar is an all-powerful sorcerer who can pretty much do anything he can think of. So it seems Aladdin is screwed, right? Well, no, because he's smart and Jafar is power-hungry and kind of insecure. Throughout the movie, Aladdin has been tricking and outsmarting people, like when he tricked the genie into helping him escape the Cave of Wonders without actually making a wish. Whereas Jafar has spent the movie being second to the Sultan, and he was pretty jealous about it. So when Jafar says that he is the most powerful being on earth and that without the genie, Aladdin is nothing, Aladdin realizes that though he can't physically beat Jafar or get the genie's lamp to wish a solution, he can trick Jafar. Aladdin taunts Jafar, saying the genie has more power than Jafar will ever have, and that the genie could take away that power, and Jafar is still just second best. Jafar, realizing that he is still just second best, wishes to be an all-powerful genie, and because of this, he ends up trapped in a lamp. The reason why I think this fight is so good and something to take account when writing a book is that the solution to this fight isn't the physical action, it is the intelligence of the character and manipulating the antagonist's specific individual weaknesses. And I think this is something important to take into account. These characters' personalities is why Aladdin wins, not their physical abilities. So in conclusion, when I tell you write a fight scene like a video game, I don't mean to actually write it like a video game, because that would be terrible. Fight scenes in a book should serve a greater purpose to the plot, be a lot shorter than that of one in a video game, and to also have a greater impact on both characters' emotions and relationships. What I mean is that when writing your fight, you should give your characters and readers all the tools they'll need to defeat their opponent ahead of time. Now, don't make the solution obvious, but make it something that your reader can follow. So when your hero finally defeats their opponent, your readers feel the same satisfaction they would if they had been the one to defeat the opponent themselves. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. It's my first weird writing tips video, and yeah, this is just something to think about. It isn't a rule, but I think it's a cool way to think of fights, and I think it could be helpful to some people. I would love to hear your opinion on this, so feel free to comment down below, and thank you for watching. And I'll see you later!